Vue 3 crash course. Let's get started. First of all, let's try to understand what Vue is. So Vue is a web framework that allows you to build single page applications, server-side rendered applications, and also statically generated apps. Not only that, you could just use Vue to create a very simple component inside your apps. It doesn't need to be a full-blown app, but normally those are the most common use cases. It's built on top of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The most important aspect about Vue, it allows you to efficiently develop user interfaces, either be it like simple or complex, and that's very important. And I've actually highlighted those two words because not only it allows you to build very easily and efficiently simple apps, it also allows you to do the exact same without any trade-offs, building complex apps. And that's one of the main reasons why Vue it's where it is at. It's just super popular. So this is how a Vue component would look like. This is like the basic example. So we've got like a JavaScript, you import create app, and then you have some data, and then you mount it and you pass an ID. And inside your HTML, you import this JavaScript file, and then you will be able to do what you can see over here. Through an handler, you can start changing this count, increasing it, and as you can see, it's working, and it's just a couple of lines of code and you've got so much stuff that's done for you. So trying to do this from scratch with just normal JavaScript would take you more lines than this. Why use Vue? Vue, it's a very lightweight framework. As I said before, if you don't want to use this to build a single page app, you just want to use it to build maybe a component inside your web app. Maybe you are already using something like React, Angular, and you want to use Vue for a certain specific part of your app. Or maybe you're not using any framework or library and you just have HTML, but you want to have some kind of interactivity inside one section of your app, and that's where Vue shines because it's super light and you could do that without like a lot of trade-offs. You could have like multiple instances. It's very easy to pick up for new developers, especially for anyone who is coming from backend and maybe has been playing around with something like Blade in Laravel or EJS in Express or Pug, one of those templating languages, and now he wants to start building more complex user interfaces. Vue is a very good solution for that. It's just super easy to pick up for new developers. It's very popular with a very big community. It's popular around the globe, but especially in China, there's a lot of companies who use Vue, and slowly but surely, more companies in the States, in Europe, are using Vue. So lastly, it has first-class citizens for the ecosystem of libraries that you would use in something like Vue to build a complex app. As an example, you've got store management with Vuex. So you have also Vue Router to basically build single page apps and have some kind of routing. And Vue already gives you this from the get-go, whereas something like React, you have to go and try to find a library that works, and sometimes they don't work very well together. You can see that it's not the same team that has worked on both libraries, and that can be annoying. That's where Vue also shines. It gives you first-class citizens for the ecosystem of libraries that you will be using, and with storage management and routing, those are like the most important ones. So you must know at least HTML, CSS, JavaScript to get started with Vue, otherwise you won't feel comfortable with it. So without any further ado, let's just get started. First, let's just go to the install page, Vue.js.org guide quick start, and over here let's just copy this command. This is gonna allow us to create the scaffolding for our Vue 3 app. Just copy this, go to terminal, paste that in, proceed, yes. Now let's just wait a couple of seconds, then choose if you want to add TypeScript, JSX support, let's just go with no, Vue Router, let's just say is no. Piña, that's for stored management. Let's just go with no. Vtest, let's just go with no. No, we can. Now let's just open it. So first of all, let's just run npm install. Now let's just run npm run dev. Let's just go to main.js, and over here we'll see a couple of interesting things. The first is that we import something called create app from Vue, and then we import a component, a .vue component called app. And then we call create app and we pass that component, and then we call the method mount and we pass this ID. Over here, you specify where you want to mount this component. So if you go to index.html, you'll see here a div with an ID app. And that's where the component where like your app is going to be mounted. So if we go back to app.vue, here is where all our app resides. So let's just remove all of this real quick and change it for this, saying hey, hello. And as you can see, it works. We get hey, hello. And we do have something, script tag over here. And then we have some styles over here. Let's just remove all of this. Okay. And let's just leave it like this. So basically, a Vue component is composed of 3 tags. So over here inside the template, we specify our HTML. Inside script, we specified our logic. And over styles, we specify our styles. So let's just try this out real quick. Let's just go with class over here and say red. And over here, let's just create a class color red. And as you can see, it works like a charm. So inside our template tag, we can use something called interpolation to basically add JavaScript to it, to maybe add something dynamic. So let's just go with a div over here. And interpolation looks something like this, okay? You open twice and then you close twice, curly braces. And over here, we can basically add any kind of valid JavaScript expression, and not a statement, but just an expression. So let's just go with a ternary operator, say true. And as you can see, we do get hello because this is true. Now let's just go with false, and we will get bye because now it just goes directly to the false statement, which is the second one. So a simple one is 1 plus 1, and we will get over here 2. So basically we can add any expression over here. So you could have like a string that says Pedro, okay? And you could say 2 lowercase, and over here you would get Pedro with lowercase. Let's uppercase everything so you can see it like more clearly. And over here we do get Pedro, which is in lowercase. So we can add any kind of valid JavaScript expression over here. But normally we do not use expressions directly inside of our HTML. So that's where the script tag comes very handy. So we can add any JavaScript expression over here, and any variable is going to be available inside our HTML. So we could like copy this, and over here same const name, okay, and then we paste this. And now let's just go back over here and say name. And now as you can see, it keeps saying Pedro. Let's just change it to Juan. And over here you can see that this still works. So this is normally how it's used. We do have over here our JavaScript logic. So over here inside our template, we will be able to reference any object or variable or function that is exposed over here as a variable. It will be accessible inside our template tag. So now let's just try to, instead of just being a normal plain old like variable, let's just try to call a function. So we can define our function like this and say my name, and we will just return Pedro. Okay, for now just leave it, let's just leave it at that. And over here we do not have name anymore, but we can do is just pass over here, say my name, and we do get Pedro. So let's just pass a variable. Let's just say over here, okay, let's just call it number, and number plus Pedro. And over here we do have to pass, it gets undefined since we didn't pass anything, but let's just pass 10, and we get 10 Pedro. One of the most handy tools that Vue gives us are the directives. So we have a couple of directives that we can use over here in our template tag. So the first one, the one that you're going to be using the most, is the if. So this is the syntax of the if directive, okay? And then over here you have to pass a Boolean value, okay? So let's just say true, and over here my name is, and now let's just copy this with interpolation, okay? And we can see that says my name is Pedro. Let's just change it to false, and we can see that it's no longer there, and now it's gone. So let's just change it back to true. And we can also have another one, which is else. And the thing with this one, it needs to go after a if. So they need to be on the same level. So if I were to add something over here, as you can see, it says they need to be together. It's complaining. So if I remove this, you can see that they are on the same level and they're next to each other. So over here, else, if this is false, this is gonna be cold. So let's just say my name is Emily, okay? And since this is true, it's saying my name is Pedro, okay? But now let's just change it to false. And now it says my name is Emily. Great. And we have a last one, which is basically else if, which is basically the normal else if that you would find in JavaScript, right? It behaves the same as a normal else if inside JavaScript. You can pass anything over here. And my name is Mario. And since this is false, this is gonna be the next one, which is true. And as you can see, it says my name is Mario. So these are very handy directives that Vue 3 gives us. And after that, we have another one. Let's just remove this. We don't need it anymore. We have another one that's very handy, and that one is the v-for. And it allows us to basically loop over any kind of data, arrays, objects, even numbers, as you will see in a minute. So first, let's just pass the name of the variable, which is going to be number. And then we can pass over here the data that we want to iterate over. And it works also with numbers. So let's just say 10. And then over here, let's just basically pass number, which is this variable that's being created over here. And over here, you can see that it automatically basically created all of these. And this is the great thing. Let's just change it to an H1 so it's bigger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's great. You can even get the index. So if you do something like this, you do get also the index, okay? In this case, it starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? We can also iterate over arrays, objects. So over here, we can have Emily, okay, Pedro, and Marco. And as you can see, Emily index 0, Pedro index 1, Marco index 2. So that's great, and we can do basically the same with objects. And that's another very handy directive that Vue gives us. Then of course we can have, normally we don't have this over here, so we would have it inside our script tag. So basically over here, let's just define names. So instead of just being a normal JavaScript like variable, let's just create a variable that is something that we would use in Vue, and we would need ref, and that's going to be coming from a Vue. You import that, and then we define a value. So the special thing about this ref, and over here, let's just say names, okay? And we do have the same. But now, let's just console log names. Let's just go to the console. So we have this ref over here, and which is basically, it has the value over here. We can grab it. So value, dot value, and it has a target which has all of this. So with this, Vue allows us to basically track this variable, and if any change is made to this reference, to these names, all is gonna refresh every single thing that's using names. So that's the great thing about this. So let's just over here. So that's how you basically define any kind of data. So you wouldn't like have it as a normal object over here like this, like a normal variable. This will still work, but the thing is that, as you can see over here, this is just a normal array. And let's just say if we change this, this won't refresh our template, and that's not what we want normally. So we just change it back to this, and now it's a ref. So these are a couple of the directives that you will be using in Vue. Let's just remove all of this and move on to something else. So let's just say that we have an ID over here, which is going to be ID, but we want this value to be dynamic. So Vue has basically something called vvines, okay, which allows us to have dynamic values inside any value of our attribute. So what we have to do is prefix this with this vvine, and then we specify the attribute that we want to bind a variable. And over here now ID, as you can see, is complaining. So over here now we can add any valid expression, JavaScript expression. Let's just want this ID to have as a value ID. So we can just have this over here as a string, and let's just add a div. That's going to be our div, okay? And if we click, we see that it has a value ID. But let's just say that we want this to be dynamic. So let's just keep it as this. Now it's expecting a variable or a method that has the name ID. So let's just go ID. And as we saw before, let's just call ref, okay? So normally, and now let's just do a very simple math.random, okay? And add some number to it. As you can see, we have a dynamic value for the value ID. We can do this with any valid HTML attribute. So let's just change this to be an input, okay? Input type text, and it's gonna have a value of value, or let's just call it input value, okay? And over here, let's just add the vvine. There's a shortcut. We just have to remove the vvine, and just like this, we have the same. Basically, this is saying vvine, but we have having to write this. This is a shortcut. And now we have an input, and the value is coming from JavaScript. This is a very simple example, but this could be coming from an API or be generated on the client side every like X amount of seconds. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm not gonna be complicating it more. So we have this, but now let's just change that. Let's just instead of just being a number, let's just leave it as something empty, and let's just say placeholder value. Okay, that's gonna be our placeholder value. So now let's just try to listen when someone types. So for that, we normally, on normal JavaScript, we have on input, and we do have something similar on Vue, which is we can do it like with the V on, okay, and then any kind of event, okay. So let's just go with input in our case. In this case, let's go with input, and over here, let's just go handle input change. And now we can create a function, okay, and over here is gonna pass an event. If you've done anything similar with JavaScript or React, this is gonna be very familiar. And now let's just console log this event dot target dot value. And as you can see over here, this is working. Now we could change the value of this ref that we have over here. So to see that the changes are being applied, I'm gonna create a div over here. So now if we type, we see that the value is coming from the event, but this is not being changed since we didn't do it. So now, as we learned before, we do have to add the dot value, and that's because it's a reactive object, okay? And equals, and then over here, we're gonna just grab this. And now let's just try to call this, and we see that this is just working. And this was pretty easy to do, and this just took us a couple of seconds to do. So we have the over here vbind, that's something like this. Vbind value, we can bind any value. So with the vbind, we can over here reference any kind of variable, and with the von, we can basically call any method on any event. But as we saw before, vbind, the shortcut is just removing the vbind, and for von, it also has a shortcut which is removing the von everything and just having it like this. This means von, and this means vbind. And now if we try to just run this, it will still work. But the thing is that Vue takes it to the next level, giving us a shortcut for both of these. Since this is something that is pretty common, listening to an event, changing a value, there's a shortcut for this. And that shortcut is called a directive called vmodel. And with that, we can just pass the ref, okay, our data or state, however you want to call it. So now let's just try to call this, and as you can see, it works. And it was just literally a directive, and it's just a couple of seconds. Another very common example with handlers and listening to events is having some kind of form, okay? But over here, you normally, in just normal HTML, it's on submit. So you would do, it's basically the same. So you have like the on and then submit, and over here you can call any method that is available over here. So let's just remove this and handle submit, and we have here an input. I'm gonna just define a value, okay, value 1. And then we have another input, and this is gonna be type submit. Okay, so we do have over here value 1, and then submit. And if I call this, you can see that first this is working. And let's just create this function real quick, and it's gonna have an event. And as you can see, it's showing the event, but also it's refreshing the page. So you could do event.prevent default, okay, prevent default, and now it shows the event, but it's not refreshing the page. So Vue also has a shortcut for this, and that shortcut is thanks to the modifiers. So the modifier, you can add any modifier adding a dot, and then after the event, you can add a modifier. And in this case, let's just call the prevent modifier. It's basically the same. So now let's just go back, refresh, and we can click, and as you can see, I don't have the prevent default value, and we still have the same behavior. The website is not refreshing. There are a bunch of event modifiers, so you can go to the Vue.js website and see like the entire documentation, but that's just one of them, prevent. So let's just see another event that's pretty common, which is just having a button and on click, handle, click. Okay, you can call this like whatever you want, but in this case, let's just press this, and as you can see, we do get like a normal JavaScript event. So now we've seen the basics of Vue. We've seen that there are some directives, that there are some event handlers. So we've seen how you can add bindings to normal attributes. We've seen how to create functions. Vue also has something called computed, and I'm going to show in a second what computed is. So let's just start by having a variable called day, which is going to be a ref, and let's just start with null. And when we click, it's just going to change the value of ref. It's going to change the value of day dot value, and it's just going to change it to Friday. Okay, because why not? So let's just have over here an h1 to show the value. Let's just show day so we can see. It starts with nothing, so that's why it's empty. But now if you click the button, it says Friday. Okay, let's just show how computed works. Computed allows us to have a value that depends on another value. So let's just say is Friday is going to be our value of the computed property. So Friday. And the syntax, the basic syntax, there is a more advanced syntax for computed properties, but the basic syntax is something like this. So you pass a callback, and that's going to have the returned value. In our case, day, that value, I want to check if it's Friday. And if it's Friday, the value of is Friday is going to be true, and if it's not, it's false. Okay, and now let's just have another h1 over here, which is going to be, okay, oh, I misspelled it, Friday. And we know that it starts with false because null is not Friday, so is Friday is gonna say false. But now let's just click the button, and now it says, now the value of day is Friday. It says true because this equals true, and that's the computed property. So instead of like changing another value and calling it dynamic, whenever day changes, the computed property is gonna be triggered. It's gonna change the value of is Friday, and because this is being watched by Vue, it's gonna automatically just change the value of the line 19, which is this one. Isn't that great? Another building block for creating Vue apps is called watch. And as the name suggests, basically it's gonna watch for something to be changed. And whenever that happens, it's gonna call a function. So the watch method accepts two parameters. The first one being whatever you want to watch. In this case, I just want to watch day, okay? If day.value changes, okay, I want to run something. In this case, let's just console log. Day changed. And we can see that day changed. Whenever the day value changes, this watch is gonna trigger the callback, the second callback that we're passing. And over here, I just console log something, but you can basically do whatever you want. You can just call an HTTP request. You can change the value of another variable. So now let's just talk about lifecycle hooks. Through the life of a component, different hooks are going to be triggered. Whenever something is rendered, whenever something is updated, run any kind of code when these hooks are called. So one of the basic ones is unmounted. Okay. We have unmounted, and that accepts over here a callback. And as you can see over here, unmounted is called when this component is mounted. So there's another one that comes before that, and that's on before mount. And as the name suggests, it just goes before unmounted. And you can see before mounted, unmounted, and there are a bunch of them. You've got the setup, you've got created, on before create, created, unmount, on before unmount. So I suggest you go to the Vue docs to see all of them and understand how they work. There is a very beautiful diagram on the Vue website where they explain these lifecycle hooks. So as you can see, this is the order: before create, created; before mount, mounted; before unmount, unmounted. And over here they've got different scenarios when they're being retriggered. And then they've got over here one called setup and composition API. So let's just talk about this composition API. So far we've been using an extra feature of Vue, and I haven't mentioned it because I didn't want to complicate things. So the composition API affects the part inside the script tag. We've been defining these methods, these watchers, computed properties, references, and then lifecycle hooks this way. But there's another way of doing this. And then if you go over here, that's called the options API. Okay. And the options API, it's like the old way of doing it. It still works. It's still supported. But the new way of doing it is the composition API. The recommended way of actually using the composition API with single file components, which is what we're doing. We have our HTML, our JavaScript, and the CSS in the same file, is using the setup. And I'm going to explain this setup in a second. So basically, as you can see over here, we have this setup attribute. And what this is saying is, okay, everything that's over here, everything that is not an import, is going to be called on the setup lifecycle hook. And we can opt out of this, but this is actually the recommended way. I'm going to just show you real quick how you would do this without this setup. First, we need define component. So we just import it. We have to export default. Okay. Then define component. And inside define component, let's just go setup. And over here, we have this. These lifecycle hooks will need to go as here as options. So on before mount, we'll go over here Okay. Unmounted. And we have to expose our variables, methods, whatever we want to access in our HTML. And this is how it would look without the setup attribute inside the script tag. So this is how we would look. We have to define the lifecycle hooks as options or methods inside this defined component object that we're passing over here. And then inside the setup, we have to actually expose any variable method that we want to be it accessible inside our HTML. So it's just up to you whatever you want to use, but Vue actually recommends using that syntax sugar. So normally we don't have everything inside our app. We do have something called components, right? So we want to encapsulate our UI, our logic inside separate components. And the way that we can do that is just going inside a folder that is created by default called components. And over here, we're gonna create a file. Let's just call this component form, okay? And we need to add the .vue extension to it. So after adding the basic syntax, in order to import this, let's just call import form from, and then over here, components, which is the folder, form.vue. It's very important to have the extension. And then over here, we can just call it as a normal HTML tag. This component, we have the form value. So we have this h1 that's coming from that component. So this is how you define a component and you import it. Now let's just introduce something that is very vital for any Vue app, and that's props. So let's just import define props from Vue. And props is basically a way from passing down information from a component, a parent component, to a child component, okay? So the syntax for this is something like this. Define props, okay? And define props takes basically an object, which on its simplest form is just key and the value being the type, okay? The name of the prop is gonna be input value, okay? The type of this input value, in this case, is gonna be string. So this is the simplest form of how you would define basically props in Vue, okay? So now let's just go over here inside our form. We don't have a form yet, but let's just create it like real quick. Okay, input type text, value, and then we can access props dot input value, and we have to make this using vbind or the shortcut, and now this would work. But the thing is that we're not passing anything to props and we do not get any errors either. So to fix this, we can actually do something like this. Change this to have a type string, and then we also can pass other key values, properties to this object, and that one is going to be required. I want this to be required equals true. And now if I refresh this, it says missing the required prop input value. And that's great because sometimes this, so we have some kind of type checks over here. There are other properties that you can use like default values and validation, but I'm not gonna get into that since that's a little bit more advanced. And now let's just go inside app, and over here I'm gonna pass that prop that I just defined inside the form component, which is gonna be input value, okay? The input value is just gonna be Manuel, okay? And so now we're passing down information from the parent component, which is app, to the child component, which is form. Now we've seen how to pass information down from the app component to the form component, from a parent to a child. Let's just see how you can do the actual opposite of it. So the way that you can do this is using something called events. So we have to first import define emits, okay? And that's how you are gonna be able to trigger events. So this is the syntax, and then over here define emits, and this is gonna take an array of all the events that you will be able to trigger. Okay, so let's just start with the submit. Okay, you can call this whatever you want. Let's use this. So we've got a type submit, which is this button. Okay, and whenever this is triggered, I want to on submit. So now let's just call this emit, which is good practice to just like have it as this, because previously before the composition API, it was called emit. Technically you can call this whatever you want, but let's just go with emit. It makes more sense. So over here, we're gonna pass the event that we want to trigger, which is this one, and then any value. And the value is just gonna be, I'm just gonna pass the event. So you could actually do something like this, and the value is gonna be the value of the event, okay? And now that we have this, let's just go to our app component, and over here we can listen to it. And the way that we can listen is if it just were a normal event. So you can do on, and then here submit, okay? And handle form submit. This is a normal method that we're gonna just create, and let's just console log args, and args is gonna come from here. Args, no args. Okay. Now let's just press this. Before this, I think this is gonna go actually refresh because we don't have. So let's just add the prevent modifier over there, and now we just try to call this, and as you can see, this is working. This is being console logged from our app.vue. I just want to say that this submit can be whatever you want. Let's just go with submit with 2 T's, and now let's just go to form, and if we change this submit with 2 T's and refresh this, this still is gonna work, and this console log is coming from our parent component. And that's how you basically pass data down with props and how you pass data up with events. That's about it. Those are the basics of Vue 3, the building blocks, and not even the basics. Some of them are a little bit more advanced, but hopefully with this crash course, you can start building awesome Vue 3 applications. And yeah, let me know what you thought about this video. If you want to get up to date with Vue 3, Laravel, JavaScript, just programming in general, and make sure to subscribe and press that bell icon, because like I don't know what YouTube is doing, that it doesn't send my videos to people. So make sure to subscribe, press the bell icon, and yeah, see you in the next one. Bye.